We can have
Should
all
we
the
begin?
videos on. Yeah.
Right. I do not see any attendees yet. All right. Hello, everyone. Greetings and a warm welcome from the Council on Energy, Environment and Water and Wilgrow Innovation Foundation. I'm Abhishek Jain, Director of the Powering Livelihoods Initiative at the Council. Now, let me now invite Ms. Bharti Gupta Ramola to kindly share her welcome remarks. Ms. Ramola was a partner at PwC from 1992 to 2017. She currently serves on the board of Wilgrow Innovation Foundation, HDFC Life Insurance Company, among others. Ms. Ramola, the stage is yours.
Good evening and welcome everybody. We are here to celebrate 1 year of the Powering Livelihood Program, which is a collaborative effort of Wilgrow and CEW. Wilgrow incubates innovation. CEW is the Council on Energy, Environment and Water, as Abhishek has already mentioned, and it's a leading policy research institution. Some time ago, the two organizations came together with a vision to power India's rural economy through clean energy solutions. In the last 1 year, the program has identified and provided capital, technical assistance, and go-to-market support to 6 wonderful enterprises engaged in deploying clean energy solutions which support livelihoods in rural India. This assistance is to help these 6 companies to scale up commercial deployment. These are all solutions that work commercially, and they essentially needed support and capital to scale up. Besides, the program extends non-financial assistance to about 10 other enterprises and engages key stakeholders, including investors and financiers, to enable sectoral growth. I think everybody on this call probably knows why distributed renewable energy is so critically important for rural livelihoods. But let me remind ourselves of 3 of the most important reasons. We desperately need more rural enterprise in India. As per some estimates, only 10% of those who have gotten into the workforce in the last 10 years have found employment, gainful employment. Reverse migration has, of course, added to the problem in rural areas. On the other hand, rural entrepreneurs struggle to be viable and to scale due to multiple reasons, including lack of a stable, secure source of energy. Secondly, we know, and I think the numbers might be different as per different people's estimates, but 30% of all farm produce in India goes waste because of a lack of scientific harvesting, storage practices, etc. And that also includes, the availability of cold storage. And then you have a situation which is that while the government of India has been trying really very, very hard to reach energy to all rural households, and the Saubhagya scheme has actually done wonders. It's really literally a bulb and a fan that is provided to remote households. So clearly this energy is not enough to power any kind of an enterprise. We also know that it is very, very expensive to take energy across the kind of expanse we are talking about. It's a lot of investment, and T&D losses in India, that's transmission and distribution losses in India are over 20%. So given all this, you can see why the program on powering livelihoods is so important. The program's investment in the last 1 year has resulted in 4,000 plus deployments of solutions which help run rural enterprises. And so we can truly say that the energy transition that everybody hopes for and wishes provides not just a push to make a change, but also a very important viable alternative to rural enterprises. I am going to stop now and not take any more time and really just welcome you all again and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Mola, for setting the stage so well for today's discussion. Now, without further ado, I'm going to turn my attention to our real heroes of Powering Livelihood Initiative, our entrepreneurs, who are really at the forefront of transforming rural livelihoods through clean energy solutions. And let us start with Kunal.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Kunal Vaid, founder of Resham Sutra. At Resham Sutra, we have introduced modern solar-powered machines to improve productivity and income of rural silk producers and handloom weavers. As you might know, the rural textile technology in India is quite outdated. As a result, the productivity and quality are poor and income is very low. And as a result, young people are leaving this industry. We are trying to change this. Our participation in Powering Livelihood program has helped to catalyze our transformation from being technology suppliers to value chain enablers. We have pivoted to a new business model where we work with silk farmers, yarn producers, weavers, fabric designers, and sellers with the aim of improving livelihood for everybody. We have been able to start new initiatives. These include the pay-as-you-go model of our machine. This helps to improve affordability. We are setting up rural experience centers. These are very remotely rural located places which offer training, pre and post purchase support, including business support. First such REC was set up in Bastar in Chhattisgarh last year. This is run by a totally women team, and more than 90% of our customers there are tribal women. We have set up the second one in Assam recently. Integrated farm to retail project. This project is in a totally greenfield area, and more than 300 tribal farmers are participating in this. We are using completely eco-friendly methods of farming, and we are expecting income increase of up to 300% for the farmers. In the future, we are working to digitize the rural silk value chain. We are connecting producers from farmers, yarn producers, weavers through a common app. We are also building a quality and organic certification system and a traceability system for the material produced here. We aim to ease transactions and maximize value creation for our rural producers. Thank you.
Abhishek, could you unmute yourself? I think you're on mute.
Yeah, namaste to all. My name is Abhishek Pathak, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Greenwear Fashion Private Limited. Greenwear is India's first brand for Solar Vastra. Solar Vastra is a new embodiment of Khadi and Billet industries, which works through a decentralized textile value chain. And it is all powered by renewable energy resources. So Greenwear procures cotton yarns spun on solar charkhas by rural women at their household. The solar charkha can produce 5 times more yarn than its normal manual charkha format. The drudgery involved is significantly less, and women who operate the solar charkhas at their household level can carry their domestic activities and do their other works. So solar charkha in modern perspective can fulfill the vision of charkha in broader perspective, like it was a symbol of self-respect, self-reliance, and economic self-sufficiency. In Greenwear, the yarns spun on solar charkhas are woven into fabrics on solar-powered looms installed at our facilities and traditional textile clusters of UP and Bihar. The fabrics are further value-added and stitched on solar sewing machines to create comfortable clothing lines. The breathability and absorbency due to anti-clockwise softly twisted yarns, use of natural fibers, and scalable production process make it special for end users and our business partners likewise. Greenwear's focus since its inception in 2019 revolved around creating livelihood opportunities for rural women and reducing carbon footprint from textile industry. Greenwear's mission is to create 5,000 jobs for rural women by 2025. With the support of Powering Livelihood program, Greenwear could streamline its business activities while sailing through the most stressful times of COVID-19. Greenware could also engage 240 new women workforce belonging to self-help groups of surrounding areas and produce more than 5 lakhs fabric face masks during the complete lockdown period and make these available for public users at as much subsidized rates. We also onboarded new institutional partners, and due to this program, our future growth prospects are highly banking on the powering livelihood. We need your support to make sustainable fashion practices a mass movement with hashtag Suncrafted. Imagine if only 5% of Indian villages become solar charkha clusters, it can produce almost 50% of India's current cotton yarn productivity and generate livelihoods of 12 million people locally. Thank you so much.
Hello, my name is Katie Taylor. I am CEO and co-founder of Kafeworks. At Kafeworks, we make solar-powered water pumps that enable smallholder farmers to cultivate year-round and to make more money sustainably. Our pump provides an alternative to depending just on monsoon rains, which are becoming increasingly inconsistent due to climate change, or on fuel-based pumping, which is both polluting and expensive. Now, there are over 26 million smallholder farmers in East India, a region where water is available, but lifting it is expensive. With increasing fuel prices and decreasing availability, farmers are being forced not to cultivate in the summer season, which is a time when crops need the most water, but when market returns are the highest. Instead, many of these farmers are leaving their homes and families for months at a time to do unskilled migratory labor. Working with smallholder farmers throughout the design process, we have developed a solution specifically fit for their needs. It's easy to use, it's portable, and it's highly efficient. The cornerstone of our patented technology, which we began developing back at MIT, is our hyper-efficient centrifugal pump. Now, we didn't go after efficiency because it's cool engineering. We did it because it matters to the farmer. High efficiency means low power is required. Low power means fewer solar panels, and fewer solar panels make the whole product more affordable and more portable. So if you're a farmer using the system, you simply carry it out to the field, connect the pumps to the panels, toss the pump in the water, flip the switch, and it runs automatically throughout the day. The portability also enables group ownership, rental models, and allows the farmer to store it securely overnight. With the help of the Powering Livelihoods program, we launched our product into the market and have sold over 200 units. The mentorship and support in the program has been incredible. And due to the mentorship, really, we have been able to make real tangible impact, which is what drives us as an organization. So we've seen farmers who've switched to using the Kafeworks solar pump who've earned up to 5 times more money this year. At Kafeworks, our success comes from the success of the smallholder farmer. Simply when they grow more, earn more, and provide more for their families and communities. And our thanks to Powering Livelihoods for making this happen.
Thanks, Katie. Vasant, could you come in? I think you're on mute. Vasant, you're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Yes.
Hi. Good morning, everybody. My name is Vasant, and I'm the founder of Hydrogreens. India is the world's largest milk producer, and for about 70 million dairy farmers, 1/3 of their rural income comes from livestock. 70% of this sector also employs women as its workforce. However, this sector is facing about 20 to 30% shortage in all types of feeds and fodder inputs because of the reasons such as climate change, groundwater depletion, and this affects their livestock income negatively by about 15 to 25% across the country. So we designed a solar-powered climate control warehouse, which we call as a fodder station. And this is co-located with a milk collection point and is the world's first model to grow and deliver about 1/2 ton of high-protein fresh fodder every day as a service, even in harsh climates. Farmers can subscribe to this service at just about 5 dimes a tray, And given the nutrient profile of the fodder, they can realize about 1 to 3 liters of more milk, or about $1 more in revenue per cattle per day, and can reduce up to 50% in feed concentrate inputs, or about $1 more savings per cattle per day. There are additional benefits like quantum savings in water usage, a reduction in 4% methane per cattle per day, and larger agricultural land availability for the farmer. From the financial support we received from Powering Livelihoods, we were able to move from 30 units to over 200 individual units sales, and from just a concept to 3 fodder stations confirmed within a year of its inception. We plan to scale up more fodder stations to generate about 18 million tons of fresh green fodder, impacting thousands of farmers' livelihood every day with $1 more in revenue and with $1 more savings per cattle per day. Requires persistent efforts at the rural last mile to be able to continue delivering the sustainable livelihood opportunities. And we require your support in the coming years to scale this everywhere. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. My name is Tushar Devidayal. I'm the founder and CEO of Devidayal Solar Solutions, DD Solar. We design and manufacture solar refrigerators for livelihood applications. We're based in Mumbai. We have approximately 375 solar refrigerator installations in India and East Africa. Our solar refrigerator solutions are used in agriculture, fruit pulp, dairy, fish, veterinary vaccine storage, and we also have mobile cold chain solutions. Our solar refrigerators are lab tested using international test methods, and we were finalists of the Global Leap Award 2019 and the winner of the Consumer Affordability Prize in the same year. What you see on the slide is our frozen fruit pulp storage case that we installed for a tribal community in Udaipur, Rajasthan in India. And this has been replicated to over 40 installations in the same tribal belt. What this did is it helped tribal women store and transport sitafal and jamun pulp, which are fruit picked from the forest, which eventually led to lower spoilage and loss. In a Kirana store retail setting, our solar refrigerators generate income in the range of 4,000 to 7,000 rupees a month, which is approximately $100 per month. We are now working on replicating use cases in Tanzania. The Powering Livelihoods program has been critical to our success. They helped us with our verticalization strategy, which essentially focused our efforts on these value chains: dairy, fish, fruit pulp, veterinary vaccine storage. Powering Livelihoods was also important in getting us investor ready with a detailed business plan, financial model, and due diligence, which served us well in our recent equity round. In terms of things that are planned ahead, Powering Livelihoods set up a risk guarantee, first loss default guarantee for us, and we have now used this to secure end consumer finance through an NBFC in India, and we're super excited to scale this offering pan-India shortly. Thank you, everyone.
आप सभी को मेरा नमस्कार। मेरा नाम प्रिंस कंबोज है। मैं धर्मवीर फूड प्रोसेसिंग टेक्नोलॉजी प्राइवेट लिमिटेड का मैनेजिंग डायरेक्टर हूं। सन 2006 में मेरे पिताजी धर्मवीर कंबोज, जिन्होंने दिल्ली में एक एक्सीडेंट के बाद रिक्शा चालक का काम छोड़ करके गांव में खेती शुरू की, उन्होंने देखा कि आंवला प्रोसेसिंग करते हुए गांव की महिलाओं के हाथ छिल जाते हैं। तब एक विचार आया और एक कम लागत वाली मल्टीपर्पज फूड प्रोसेसिंग मशीन डिजाइन की, जो बिना सीड क्रश किए फ्रूट जैम, जूस, पल्प, हर्बल एसेंस, एसेंशियल ऑयल, फल छिलाई, कटिंग, हीटिंग, डेस्टिलेशन, प्रेशर कुकर, होमोजेनाइजर आदि के इस्तेमाल के लिए किया जा सकता है। इसे 2019 में पेटेंट भी मिला है। यह मशीन वेजिटेबल्स एंड फ्रूट्स, मेडिसिनल प्लांट्स, स्पाइसेस, एरोमेटिक प्लांट्स, फ्लावर को बर्बाद होने की समस्या को हल कर सकती है। खासकर मार्जिनल किसानों के लिए जिनको फूड प्रोसेसिंग ट्रेनिंग नहीं मिलती हो, वह भी महंगी मशीनें खरीदने में असमर्थ हैं। हमारी मशीन के जरिए लोगों की आजीविका में बदलाव लाने के लिए और अनेक किसान, सेल्फ हेल्प ग्रुप, एनजीओ, फूड प्रोसेसिंग इंडस्ट्री को फूड प्रोसेसिंग ट्रेनिंग देने के लिए हमें बहुत सारे अवार्ड भी मिले हैं। सन 2013 में मेरे पापा को भारत के माननीय राष्ट्रपति द्वारा नेशनल अवार्ड से भी सम्मानित किया गया है। पावरिंग लाइवलीहुड की प्रोग्राम ने हमारी फैक्ट्री में प्रोडक्शन दुगनी करने में और आमदनी को साल में दुगना करने में बहुत अहम भूमिका निभाई है। अनेक इलाकों में सोलर पावर के जरिए हमारी मशीनें चलाई जा रही हैं और हम उसको बढ़ावा देना चाहते हैं। हमें उम्मीद है कि हम देश और विदेश में फूड प्रोसेसिंग को लोकप्रिय बनाने में खास भूमिका निभाएंगे। नमस्कार, धन्यवाद।
Thank you, Prince. And that was quite a lot you packed in a few minutes. Let me translate some of it for our audience who couldn't follow the Hindi. So Prince is the managing director of Dharambir Food Private Limited, one of our 6 cohort enterprises. His father, Dharambir Kamboj, was actually a rickshaw puller in Delhi almost about more than a decade and a half ago. And while in Delhi, he actually saw that a lot of the value-added produce from various kind of fruits, fruits and vegetables are actually being sold at a much higher price than the actual raw fruit itself. And after an unfortunate accident in Delhi, he moved back to his village and started looking at how can we create a low-cost processing machine that can help rural women in particular to process all those different kinds of fruits, vegetables, herbs, into various kinds of output, whether it is pulp, whether it is juices, squashes, jams, soaps, essential oils, and whatnot. And they ended up creating a machine which does all of that in a single machine. And the machine is very, very affordably priced. It has been granted a patent last year. The machine and the innovator himself, Mr. Kamboj, has received national award from the President of India and has been recognized at various other platforms as well. With the help of Powering Livelihoods, they have managed to double their production within the first 8 months of being in the program. And as a result, have also managed to double their income because they were already struggling to meet the order book as their production capacity was much lower. And now they are really hoping that their solar variant of the machine can not just become ubiquitous here in India, but also globally. Thank you, Prince, and indeed thank you to all our wonderful entrepreneurs who have shared their stories as well as what they are doing across the board. It's essentially your efforts which is really making us all proud and give us the constant motivation and inspiration to keep working with you all. Now, without further ado, I would also like to turn our attention to Ms. Stephanie Jones. So Stephanie manages the energy program at Good Energies Foundation, developing its strategy, managing its grant, and creating strategic alliances with various other foundations. She focuses on the market-based support interventions, both in India as well as in Sub-Saharan Africa. And before I really hand over to Stephanie, I must say that she has been one of the biggest supporter and one of the first supporter of Powering Livelihoods. In fact, well before its genesis and conception. We've been working together on the Powering Livelihood, which was not even called Powering Livelihood for now more than 4 years. With that, let me invite Stephanie to really discuss the role of philanthropy in scaling distributed renewables for livelihoods globally. Stephanie, over to you.
Great. Thanks, Abhishek. Thank you so much. It's really an honor to be part of today's conversation. And since I haven't been able to be with all of you in India in real person, I've put myself there virtually, visiting one of my favorite mini grids. So I'm actually sitting in Amsterdam at my first work travel in a year and a half. So hopefully I can actually get back to India very soon. But to keep the momentum going today so we can get on to the next speakers, I have just 3 short points from the perspective of philanthropy. So Good Energies is a private family foundation with a very specific focus, addressing poverty and climate change by promoting renewable energy and healthy tropical forests. Of course, we're here today to talk about the role of renewables in creating livelihoods, and our foundation has 3 approaches relevant to our discussion today. We take risk, we catalyze growth, and we focus on people. So private philanthropy really should be seen as the ultimate risk capital, whereas governments and businesses are accountable to the public and shareholders respectively. Philanthropy is aiming only for social returns and benefits. And we believe private philanthropy should be the most risk tolerant of all funding, taking high risk where high social returns are possible. We fund early stage ideas, research, and enterprises, looking for people and businesses who need relatively small amounts of money to try something new, to test a wild idea, and to innovate. And often a small amount of money is all it really takes. If a project doesn't work out as planned, sometimes we call that a failure, sometimes not. We haven't lost too much in terms of money. And importantly, and hopefully, we've learned something in the process. And if it succeeds, then we hope that the idea will be picked up by other funders who are not as risk tolerant or who can spend more money than we can, but only if there's a good chance of success. So that brings me to our second approach, which is using leverage and linking to catalyze the growth of good ideas, which we've been able to do with Abhishek and his team, trying something at a small scale and helping to bring it to a larger scale. So with our small budget, we have to leverage our money and make sure we help create links between successful ideas and innovations and other funders. So we leverage our money by using it as first loss or guarantees to attract other less risk tolerant funders. And we work really closely with our grantees and other funders, whether foundations such as IKEA and Dune, public entities, including international development finance and local governments, and also commercial investors, which are often necessary. So our goal is to help get good ideas, activities, and technologies onto a path to scale, with a range of funders gradually picking up ideas as they are proven and ready to be replicated. So working with other funders early on increases the chances that their concerns are addressed along the way, which is why it's really important to involve, government stakeholders early on in a process, or other funders, even if they're not funding right from the start, to help meet their interests. So the third approach I want to mention is really the most important. We focus on people in our work, starting with their needs and ambitions. We're not interested in solar power or electrons just for those things. We're aiming for the benefits they can bring. This means we don't take a technology first approach, pushing out machines invented far away from people who use them. And all solutions, including technological ones, need to start with the ultimate user. When we look to build new businesses, we should challenge ourselves to go find inventors and entrepreneurs who come from within the communities that are benefiting from distributed renewables. And all entrepreneurs, no matter their background, benefit from working closely with their customers and really understanding them. So focusing on people is why I really like that this discussion is framed around livelihoods, because a livelihood is a means to secure the necessities of life. It goes well beyond a job, which is a specific task. We need quality, well-paying, and resilient jobs, but our ultimate aim is meeting the needs and ambitions of people with livelihood creation. So a quick example demonstrating how all three of these approaches can come together. For the past 6 years, we've funded quick cycle solutions development for solar-powered health centers, innovations that improve outcomes for patients and are appropriate to their settings. It's not fair to ask patients, local communities, or money-strapped governments to take such a risk in developing new technologies or new ways of operating health centers. But the pandemic has brought much needed attention to the dire state of rural healthcare in many areas. So now that solar for public health centers is a proven model, it's starting to scale. So just on Saturday, I got word of a nascent government plan to solarize public health centers across 10 Indian states, with the potential to benefit 250 million people. Obviously, that's not something that Good Energies could have funded from our own budget or from the start, nor would it have been good solutions if we'd tried to do it on our own right from the start. So these solutions were built from the ground up, starting with the most underserved health facilities and the needs of specific patients and healthcare providers. So while adjustments to such approaches would be needed for different local conditions, there's little reason to think that the same approach of solarizing health centers couldn't be exported as a model from India to other countries with similar needs. So that's all I wanted to say here. I'm really looking forward to hearing the next speakers. Thank you again for the opportunity to join this group today. And thank you to all of those. I see there's a ton of participants online, which is really great, showing that you're all interested in working with us to create the billions of sustainable livelihoods that we need powered by renewables. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, for outlining the theory of change at Good Energies Foundation. And many thanks to all the 6 entrepreneurs who've dazzled us with their journeys. And I hope your journeys continue forward. I just want to take this moment to acknowledge that Mr. Achim Steiner, the administrator of UNDP, and Dr. Janmijaya Sinha, the trustee of CEW, and the chairman of Boston Consulting Group in India have also joined this program. Just before I turn over to my colleague Abhishek to present on how far this program has come, I just wanted to underscore once again the story that Stephanie outlined and this very exciting news on solarizing primary health centers. At CEW several years ago, we did the first evaluation of how this was unfolding in just one state. And it's so exciting to see that what we had recommended in our report of jobs growth and sustainability last year is now a national program spanning across many states and bringing clean energy to sustainable healthcare. Abhishek, now over to you to talk to us about how far the Powering Livelihoods program has come.
Thank you, Arunabha. And let me just quickly share my screen and we'll all set. Yeah, I hope my screen is visible. So yeah, what I'm going to do in next 8 to 10 minutes is really take us through the journey of Powering Livelihood, the year 1, and what have we achieved so far in our journey. And we know that last year has been quite an unprecedented one. We see more than 100 million people globally moving back to extreme poverty. 760 million still lack basic electricity access. And 1 in 4 globally are below the lower middle income poverty line, that is $3 a day. So the big question is, how can we deliver jobs and income growth in developing countries in a climate-constrained world? And we firmly believe that the productive use of distributed renewables can be the solution. In India alone, we estimate a market size of more than $50 billion for such clean energy powered solutions to power livelihoods. The solar pumping program in India itself stands at $18 billion. And the opportunity is much larger in sub-Saharan Africa, with more than 100 million farmers who are still waiting to get power for various value addition as well as for their irrigation needs. And just as an example, an estimate from Ethiopia suggests that an investment of about $380 million can yield incomes worth $4 billion, a 10x return on what could be those public and private investments. Now, it was this story of potential impact as well as the opportunity of the market that really drove CEW and Wilgrow to come together and start what we call Powering Livelihood, with a vision to ensure that decentralized renewables become an integral part of rural livelihoods within this decade. And how do we do it? We provide deep venture building support to enterprises, all of those stories that you heard just a little while ago. We provide capital support, we provide technical assistance and mentorship, as well as business expansion and fundraising support. But we do not stop there. We really leverage the enterprise growth to move the sector forward. And that's what we call market acceleration. And within market acceleration, we generate high impact and evidence data. We leverage that impact evidence data to broker conversations with investors, financiers, and policymakers to further the market as well as policy. And we do all of this with an explicit focus on gender inclusion. With gender inclusive business strategies, with sex disaggregated data, and having a dedicated team with dedicated expertise on gender inclusion, both within Wilgrow and CEW. Just a quick snapshot of where have we come in the year 1 of the program. We have enabled more than 4,700 rural livelihoods, all powered through clean energy solutions. And 84% of these solutions are for women. More than 4,000 deployments, 3 commercial fundraise, and 1 more in the pipeline. Almost 31% increase in the revenue of our program enterprises at a cumulative scale. Some of them have grown more than 2x. And this is despite being in a very challenging year. And the sector overall has seen almost $3 million of commercial capital being raised in the last 1 year. Now let's hear briefly from some of the program partners that what has been their experience with the program.
Recently, I got to meet one of our Powering Livelihood enterprises. And it was a great experience, and especially to learn how impactful the Powering Livelihoods program has been during COVID on the enterprise and all of the employees that it has within the organization. I think some of the reasons why the Powering Livelihood program has been so critical at this stage has just been, the kind of hands-on approach that you have, hand-holding the enterprise every step of the way. This has helped identify and mitigate risks really quickly. The holistic approach that Powering Livelihoods provides, working on incentives, technical assistance, linking enterprises to different types of support has really helped to scale up gender-inclusive solutions. And I think just the fact that Powering Livelihoods has created this consortium of like-minded partners that are working on different aspects of the ecosystem, this really helps impact be transformational. So I think this is what I've really, enjoyed seeing through the Powering Livelihoods platform in the last year. Recently, I got to meet one of.
All right. Now, one other thing that I would like to quickly turn our attention to, which is a unique feature of the program, is what we call a funders committee, where we have brought together various investors, financiers, as well as philanthropies to essentially create a funding continuum for the enterprises in the sector. And as you can see, there are various familiar names, both Indian and international entities who meet every quarter to take this course forward. Now let's hear very quickly from one of the funders committee members that what have been their experience with the program.
Our work is very aligned to the way Powering Livelihoods has been designed, right? Our energy thesis, where energy access and energy for livelihoods are a very important priority area, it sort of aligns very well with the thought process that Powering Livelihoods has had. And I think one of the reasons why we chose to partner with Powering Livelihoods, or why I chose to come on board with, on your committee, is essentially because a collaborative space is needed. While all of us stakeholders are working on supporting priority problem statements, in the same sector, in the energy for livelihood space, we sometimes work on engaging with the same enterprises and supporting them. It is required that as investors, as funders, as providers of philanthropic capital or investment capital, we all collaborate and make sure that we are, what we are creating is a continuum of investment capital, so that startups have different kinds of funds available at different stages based on their requirement and growth journey. And therefore, our joining the network of other investors and understanding how they think about this space, and also individually about these enterprises, was helpful for us to share our own thought process, as well as have listen from other investors in terms of what their plans are.
Right. And very quickly, just to talk about what have been our engagements with the policy side. So as many of you would be already aware, that on the back of program's effort, the Government of India, Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, has already released a draft policy to develop and promote decentralized renewables for livelihood applications. It is, once formalized, it is going to be first such policy of its kind in the world, which particularly focuses on leveraging renewables for livelihoods. The policy focuses on a market-oriented ecosystem and has a particular focus on women and marginalized sections to make sure that it is inclusive. It is not so common to see such elements in a policy in India, so we are very happy that this is coming forward. Now, briefly, let's hear from what do the government officials think about the sector as well as the program over the last 1 year.
In the first wave of Corona-19 pandemic, there was a mass reversal of migration, and we thought of how to promote the rural economic opportunities. So to promote the local products, make in India products, we thought that it will be appropriate. We should promote distributed renewable for powering micro enterprises and productive activities in the rural area. The policy that we are proposing is focusing on scaling such field-tested solutions and extend support for development and innovation in newer solutions. So CEW's work on the DRE applications and formulating policy support for the ministry is really appreciable, They have already done a number of studies on this sector, and their work has been very useful for populating this DRE policy.
Right. Now, with all of that achieved in year one, what lies next? We are expanding the program support from our core enterprises to also the affiliate enterprises of the program. We are partnering with many more market enablers to ensure that these solutions reach many more end users. And to enable that adoption, we are also partnering with various end user financiers. And I think the biggest impact that the program has created is really to bring various kinds of practitioners together, from donors to financiers to investors to ecosystem players to market enablers to, of course, the enterprises themselves. And it is this collective that we believe can really transform the landscape of the sector within India. Now, if all of that we can achieve in India, we believe that with more strategic partnerships, we can achieve a lot more globally. And to talk about that, now let me again invite Arunabha to quickly come in.
Thank you, Abhishek. From what you've heard, ladies and gentlemen, our theory of change is straightforward, not easy, but straightforward. Research to action, to policy, to scale. Now, from what we are trying to do here in India, we were wondering, can we take this global? So very recently, my colleague Abhishek, Sanjana, and I have published a paper arguing for powering livelihoods globally. And what would that mean? It would mean that we create a platform that brings together different kinds of actors. Stephanie talked about the role of philanthropy, the role of patient capital, the role of risk capital, the role of venture capital, the role of commercial capital. And how can we bring them together, but not with a supply-driven approach, but a demand-centric approach, which helps to innovate and develop these products on the ground in a way that resonates very well with the end consumer and also helps the entrepreneur to scale. And that's the catalytic work that Powering Livelihoods Globally could do and take these innovations from lab to market. As we saw that the market is not just more than $50 billion in India, but tens of billions of dollars across the world. And to do that, you need to solve for value, not just volume. You need to think of these enterprises not as afterthoughts, not as marginal things, but as medium-scale enterprises raring to grow, and hence looking at bottom lines, not just sales. And therefore, we look at a partnership of equals between the enterprise, the government policy ecosystem, but also this range of stakeholders, similar to what the previous slide showcased in terms of just the partners we've been able to bring together in India. If we did that, then we leverage this power of the collective. Where I sit, I think about powering livelihoods globally as something that can connect SDG 1 on removing poverty, SDG 5 on gender equality, SDG 7, of course, on sustainable energy, SDG 8 on decent work and economic growth, SDG 12 on responsible production and consumption, SDG 13 on climate action, and of course, SDG 17 on partnerships. It gives me now great pleasure to formally welcome and introduce our key speakers. Mr. Achim Steiner has been the administrator of UNDP since 2017. He is also the vice chair of the UN Sustainable Development Group, which unites 40 entities of the UN system to support sustainable development. Over nearly 3 decades, Mr. Steiner has been a global leader of sustainable development, climate resilience, and international cooperation. He has worked tirelessly to champion sustainability, economic growth, and equality for the vulnerable, and has been a vocal advocate for the Sustainable Development Goals. I also warmly welcome Dr. Janmejaya Sinha, a member of CEW's Board of Trustees and the chairman of the Boston Consulting Group in India. He has worked extensively with clients across the world on a range of issues encompassing large-scale organizational transformation, strategy, governance, family business issues, and operations turnaround. He's been a member of various committees set up by the Government of India, the Reserve Bank of India, the Indian Banks Association, and now chairs the Confederation of Indian Industries Committee on Inclusion and Digitization. Prior to joining BCG, he He worked with the Reserve Bank of India for several years across many departments and has also worked briefly for the World Bank. Let me also take a moment to acknowledge our long-standing relationship and partnership with UNDP in India and thank Ms. Shoko Noda, resident representative for UNDP India, for joining us in this program as well. Thank you, Shoko. As I set this context for this dialogue between Mr. Steiner and Dr. Sinha, I'm just excited by what CEW and Wilgrow have done thus far in bringing together philanthropies, investors, financiers to catalyze a sector that didn't really exist in everyone's minds, and yet the innovations were happening. Taking inspiration from this, can we, as I was arguing earlier, catalyze the distributed renewable energy sector to power livelihoods globally? For this, we will need a genuine partnership, biased towards action and beyond mere commitments, not just to bring millions out of abject energy poverty, but to actually help them grow their incomes through sustainable livelihoods. To do that, we'll need an anchor. In India or in Sanskrit, we use a word sutradhar for anchor, one who ties it all together, who can bring the philanthropies, the financiers, the investors, the national governments, civil society together at a global scale. 4 weeks short of COP26, as we look, and about a week and a half after the UN high-level dialogue on energy, which also Mr. Steiner co-chaired, I wonder, can we raise our ambitions? Could UNDP be a critical partner in anchoring such an initiative globally? Let's hear it directly from Mr. Steiner in conversation with Dr. Sinha.
Thank you, Arunabha. And it's a privilege for me to welcome Mr. Steiner to this discussion. Mr. Steiner, you have been a champion of sustainable development, of climate resilience, of international cooperation and economic growth, and the tensions between them. Do you think that governments and corporations have effectively brought these themes together? What more can be done to ensure that there is no tension between the twin goals of climate and economic development?
Well, thank you, Dr. Sinha. It's a pleasure to meet you on a Zoom platform, and to my dear friend Arunabha also, thank you for this invitation and the kind words about, first of all, the work that we do together in India. To my colleague Shoko also and all the participants, it's always a privilege to be part of a discussion that takes its starting point from within India, but then very quickly begins to look well beyond India. And this is why I was so much looking forward to joining you today. And to your question, Dr. Sinha, I think as always, we can find examples of where indeed governments and corporations have, in a sense, aligned themselves in the face of an extraordinary challenge, which is really, I think, put at its most simple, the decarbonization of our economy, where the key sector or the key technological frontier that will allow us to progress quickly in line with the IPCC is the energy sector. So I think the discussions just now on powering livelihoods are precisely the kind of incubation. But then, as you also pointed out, Abhishek, very quickly, you have to move upstream into the policy and regulatory framework, and you have to move downstream to a citizen demand and user-centric approach. Now, the truth is, where we are in the year 2021, there are plenty of examples of how it can be done. And we can, look to India, we can look to Denmark, we can look to, countries such as Ghana, Ethiopia, but also, really across the globe. The advent of renewable energies, I think, speak both in terms of the speed of how they are now emerging, and also the cost per kilowatt hour that has come down, that we are in the midst of really witnessing an energy revolution. Now, the challenge is that progress is very uneven. We have still many parts of the world that have neither the regulatory nor the institutional and policy conditions in place to allow the kind of scaling up that we're talking about. And here the relation between corporations, and I would even go further, the market and the public policy arena really are crucial. No government will have from within its own budgets the means by which to finance the kind of energy transition we're talking about. This will affect every household, every company, small, medium-scale enterprises, large corporations. And I think what we really need to accept is that this is not something that the market will sort out on its own, but neither can government sort it out on its own. And this is why this is such a uniquely important topic, because in the way that we can accelerate smart policy, we can also scale up the investments. And I think very important here is also to have an understanding, and Arunabha, you mentioned the high-level dialogue on energy, which really was focused on this Sustainable Development Goal 7. If you just go by quantities, you will go to where it's easiest to do. You will provide energy to those who can afford to pay for it, but that cannot be the way in which we interpret access to energy as a fundamental development driver. So what is so critical and crucial, and the Powering Livelihoods example that we just listened to, but many other examples across the world in terms of access to energy, I think speak to the developmental nature of it. And I want to just, in the simplest form, say, if you take the Sustainable Development Goals, they provide, first of all, an international collaborative agenda. They also provide a recognition of how interdependent we are, not only as nations, but in fact also in the actions we take. So Arunabha, you just did a beautiful piece of work, so I won't repeat it, just connecting the SDG 7 energy Sustainable Development Goal to poverty, to employment, to industrialization, to jobs. This is precisely what we need. And I think that's where the rate of return on investment becomes one that is not only in a corporate, let's say, balance sheet, it's also in a national economic development rate of return on investment that we can see the extraordinary opportunities. So I would say to your question, yes, we see increasingly the convergence, but we see inertia, we see vested interests, we see lack of policy awareness, and sometimes simply not the ability to design, shape, and drive this energy revolution that we really are now finding ourselves in the midst of, but in a very uneven and unequal world.
There is an interesting dichotomy which I'd like to explore with you. The number of climate events across the world this year, whether it's California, Germany, India, China, you look at it across the world, the nature of the climate events make it clear that you cannot ignore climate anymore. It is obvious and it's clear. But during these events, mitigation efforts get almost challenged by development needs of the poor who get displaced quite often. And you, with your background, have been dealing with these tensions. What could be a humane narrative that can be created which can allow both the need to take these climate events as serious and real and immediate, while not overlooking the continued development needs of the poor?
Prasanna, let me answer it in two ways. First, there are real choices to be made. One of the great lessons, I think, of the 20th century is of, let's say, a modern understanding of development is that policy choices matter and that they can, to some extent, mitigate sometimes the short-term disruption that can be imposed, be it on certain groups of citizens, be it on certain sectors in an economy. And I think we are continuously learning how best to do this. But at the same time, there are many false dichotomies. Let me give you one example. We continue to subsidize with hundreds of billions of dollars a year fossil fuel consumption. It has been done and continues to be done very often in the name of economic competitiveness, but also in terms of being sensitive to the energy needs and costs of the poor. Now, every economist, starting with the IMF, but also in India and in many other countries, has by now proven that fossil fuel subsidies applied across, in a sense, a national economy are, first of all, a very inefficient and largely ineffective way of actually dealing with the challenge of energy pricing. It is an ineffective and inefficient way of using taxpayers' money. On top of that, very often it is regressive because the majority of fossil fuels in quantitative terms is consumed by wealthier citizens by industry, and therefore a disproportionate amount of that taxpayer subsidy for energy pricing accrues to those who are actually wealthier, not to the poorest. There are far more targeted means by which we can address the energy needs of the poor, including being priced out of the market, than by the kind of blunt tool that we use with fossil fuel subsidies. The second part is markets are often attributed with, being the better allocator of resources. But what we've learned in climate change is that to some extent, the inertia that is inherent in financial markets, in industry, in the design of sectoral policies is simply not fast enough to allow us to stay within the time window that the IPCC has now, in a sense, given us, which is less than 10 years to try and decarbonize by 45% greenhouse gas emissions. So we also need to look at how we can, and you asked for a narrative, I think one that has emerged is just transitions. This is a transitional period where we are moving from one energy era and dependence into an entirely new one. This is where public policy, tax and subsidies regimes, but also in the way that we design these transitions, we can have very targeted policies that can indeed assist, first of all, within the country, those who may bear the cost of these rapid transitions. It could be, the coal mining communities that have for perhaps decades or sometimes a century built their entire livelihoods, towns, villages, communities around the coal mine. You have to factor the disruption of these communities into the cost of transition. Equally, what we are also seeing is that with far more targeted policies, we can today actually create access to energy, even in economies, and here, let me cite Nigeria, but there are also other examples where after 5 decades of major oil and gas exploration and exports, actually more than 2/3 of the population has no access to electricity. This is a public policy failure, not the lack of affordability. So one of the things that UNDP is very engaged in many countries now is to look at how we can accelerate the deployment of off-grid renewable energy technology. For instance, in Africa, 18 countries now are part of a GF-funded mini-grid program that allows us to bring the affordability of solar power to the most remote villages without waiting for essentially capitals and the national economy to invest in a power infrastructure grid. So there are shortcuts available to us today also that fundamentally change what was indeed 20 years ago a dilemma, but in today's world has changed completely. So my argument and final point would be, we know since Lord Nicholas Stern's famous report that is well over a decade ago, that the cost of inaction to our economies and societies by far exceeds the cost of transition. So this is an allocation, a policy, and an investment challenge, not an impossibility. But I want to again use that notion of just transition, which is, to Arunaba's point also, in a few weeks, the world will meet again in Glasgow in the context of a global climate effort. And again, we have to recognize that the wealthier parts of the world, also the parts of the world that have the greatest emissions footprint, historically speaking, have to step up and become co-investors in those less able to make these rapid transitions. And I use the term co-investment very deliberately, and perhaps we could come back to it later, because there is also a major misperception that basically unless the rich world pays, the poor world will not invest in energy transitions. It's a complete misrepresentation, both factually, politically, and tactically, of what really is likely to play out in the next 10 years.
You were talking about policy prescriptions and pricing, and I wanted to explore that subject a bit further with you. Path dependency in respect to policies which are obviously doing harm are very difficult to reverse due to vested interest groups. So if power is priced or is given free, even to the bottom of the pyramid, to the farmers and to small farmers and agricultural laborers, it leads to its own, pathologies in terms of what it does, in terms of extracting water, in terms of the need of the running that power, which becomes infrequent. Is UNDP looking at the possibility of sharing good policy practices across the world to scale them around energy, where there are these path-dependent old policies of free power to agriculture or whatever, and free water, and actually suggest and bring about the fact that pricing is not an attack on the poor, but actually helps them in some ways, and which policies have worked where. Would you want to talk a little bit about this?
Sure. Let me begin with an interesting example that I personally learned a great deal about when I lived in South Africa and was engaged with an effort to study the impact of water resources policy and dams on different parts of society across the world. A very interesting lesson from South Africa when it moved out of the apartheid era into being led by Nelson Mandela and a new government, how it would write a constitution, and then how that constitution would address inequality, historical, structural inequality, racism within South Africa's economy. And the issue of water was a very interesting one. We lived in an era for much of the 20th century where the more water you used, the more you were rewarded with actually a discounted tariff. So the whole logic was that the cost of providing you with a liter of water was per, liter of water less if you used more. So the entire pricing structure was geared towards actually saying, look, the more you use, the cheaper water will become. We have since then moved beyond that and have actually reversed that. And in South Africa, it was very interesting because South Africa took charging a real cost for water, but built into the price was a basic allocation of 25 liters a day for every citizen in the country for free. As a recognition that water is a fundamental right, it's fundamental to surviving. Now, some might say that distorts, in a sense, efficient allocation. I would argue it's never, just black and white. You need to find smart instruments where, for instance, a basic minimum access to water is needed to survive. But the person who just 10 miles on is filling a swimming pool up with 5,000 liters of water clearly has to pay a different tariff, an escalating tariff. And that escalation enabled the South African society to ensure that every citizen had a minimum allocation of 25 liters. Now, obviously with energy, we have lived also through an era where sometimes for political reasons and well-intended measures, providing, for instance, free electricity to farmers was seen as an anti-poverty instrument. It can be, but at a certain point, it has to remain affordable and financeable. And I think very often what we have learned as UNDP, and this is our daily bread and butter, is to learn from very different approaches in different countries how precisely designed instruments work. The theory of change that Arunabha mentioned earlier on in relation to powering livelihoods is precisely what we have learned in so many different contexts. And I think today there are also moments where perhaps a period of transition requires maybe a free allocation of a certain amount of electricity, where the upfront investment may be subsidized simply because the capital cost initially is higher than anybody could afford. But we also have learned that, very often for basic needs like electricity and water that people need in an urban area, it is the poor who often pay 3 to 4 times the tariff of the mainstream consumers because they have to buy water from people who bring it in bikes into the slums, for instance. So poor people are paying. In fact, they're often paying excessively for these basic needs for their daily lives. And that's where public policy has had some of its greatest breakthroughs, when it understands the economy of the poor and then designs national policies around that. And so indeed, I would argue, we are not in a world where we can advocate free energy for all, and it has to be paid for somewhere. But the beautiful part of living in this era is that because of renewable energy and the cost per kilowatt hour that has dropped so significantly, and the off-grid opportunities, it allows us to much faster to connect the 800 million people who still live without access to electricity in this century. First of all, to an access to electricity. And from there on, you start and you will begin to see a very different kind of energy economy emerge. We will begin to connect essentially decentralized off-grid power generation increasingly to a national energy grid, and power production will, if you want, come in a sense from the grassroots up into the national grid. And then I think you no longer have this dilemma that so often has been invoke when it comes to pricing. But at the end of the day, we also have to achieve something else. We have to get carbon pricing into our economies, because otherwise neither the financial markets, nor industry, nor the urban centers will begin to adjust their patterns of consumption. And that is the second challenge: how to design a carbon price that does not discriminate against the poor. And we've seen reactions to that in France. You may recall 2 years ago, the yellow vests. We have seen in many developing countries the overnight removal of fossil fuel subsidies leading to riots. There are many better lessons and ways of doing this than just cutting a subsidy overnight. And I think here UNDP is indeed engaged in a very active effort in dozens of countries to try and advance the reduction of fossil fuel subsidies, while at the same time having very targeted measures in place for the most vulnerable.
Mr. Steiner, you have been an advocate of the rights of women and girls. How would SDG 5 goals and targets help bring women to the forefront of achieving sustainable development?
You know, in the midst of this pandemic, it has been a very interesting experience, because in many of our countries, very often women were amongst the leading actors in the response to COVID, whether in hospitals, in health centers, whether in families, whether in dealing with the fact that education systems collapsed. And I think it, in one sense, provided us with a reminder of how central the role of women, first of all, are in our daily economy, whether it is the family economy, whether it is the national economy, whether it is the health economy. But together with UN Women, UNDP also established a monitoring platform for COVID policy responses in terms of gender. And yet again, what we discovered is that more often than not, and this is by far more often than not, women are not at the table when decisions are being developed, when programs are being designed. And so here is the first major challenge. As long as we continue to drive development decision-making, whether at a local council level or whether in a corporate context or in a national economic context, if women are not at the table and are not able to express and bring their insight to the design, we will make serious mistakes. And it is also why economists today, again, beginning with the IMF, estimate that the world economy is, losing literally hundreds of billions of dollars every year, because it does not understand at national level how to invest in women, how to empower women. So as the United Nations, but also as the development program of the United Nations, you rightly pointed the fact that we are heavily invested in trying to help national decision-making, national policy-making, first of all, to understand the economy that women drive, and also the centrality of the processes that shape that economy, whether in parliaments or whether around tables in the local community. And I think for me, that is the departure point, because from there on, very quickly, you will see that the ideas, the programs, the investment opportunities that emerge become very self-evident. And, one of the partnerships that UNDP, together with UN Women and the Women Entrepreneurial Platform of Niti Aayog, is in fact, pursuing in terms of a consortium for women entrepreneurs in India. It's just one illustration of how you can create deliberate policy space that immediately translates into economic investment. So let me say again, and not least also in the face of what we are seeing, for instance, in Afghanistan right now. It is a tragedy of the 21st century that we may have millions of girls being thrown back into an era where they don't have access to education. I mean, my hope is very much that that era is not returning. But I think we have to fight for this in virtually every country, every day, to not allow those, either out of prejudice or bigotry or whatever ignorance it may be, to continue to propagate a future in which women and girls are often seen as secondary in both rights and in economic relevance.
Let me bring you to something that we were discussing. I don't know at what point you joined, but if we were to take inspiration from what Powering Livelihoods is trying in India, boosting the rural economy by scaling up the penetration of clean energy powered applications, what are methods that you have seen work to scale these up globally? Because one of the biggest things which Arunabha was also referring to is how do we scale these things up so that the mainstream shifts from the past to what we need for the future?
And there is never a singular thing, but perhaps the easiest way to give it a name is alignment. I think the greatest accelerator and driver of scaling up is when you achieve alignment between the people that you're trying to serve, the policy that shapes a national environment, and the actors, particularly also in the financial markets. I think probably for me, the greatest singular both obstruction sometimes, but also potentially gear changer in the coming years is going to be how financial markets and investors view an inclusive, sustainable energy revolution. That transition towards a decarbonized economy that has to be as much about carbon emissions as it is about people being able to live their lives and secure their livelihoods. And I would argue that in the way that we both listen to Powering Livelihoods, in the way that UNDP has been working for many years in many countries, we underestimated, I think, the need for a systemic response. At the end of the day, our economies, consist of millions of people, but also thousands of businesses, of financial investors, banks, funds, and an international economy, and corporations also who can invest in the energy sector, for instance, in mobility. And I think we have underestimated the urgency with which we need to achieve that alignment. And where you do get that alignment, you get extraordinary breakthroughs. If you look to Europe for a moment, we have seen countries such as Denmark and Germany, through a very deliberate policy process, massively increase the investment in renewable energy infrastructure. Indeed, Denmark is now, getting close to 65%, I think, of its electricity supply being renewable. The lights haven't gone out, the economy has not imploded, employment is doing very well. Or one of the largest exporting economies in the world, Germany, approaching 50% of its electricity supply now with renewables. Just think back 10 years ago. This was going to be the end of Germany's economy in the minds of some. And I think we have seen the opposite. And then let me also recognize India. I think the inspiring commitments being made by the government of India to increase by 450 gigawatts renewable energy infrastructure, energy efficiency. A few years ago, we were in a world where we debated climate change as if it was something that set the North against the South, developing against developed countries. And not to minimize the historical dimension, but as Lord Nicholas Stern says, and has said a number of times from his new life at the London School of Economics, climate change will be the strongest, greatest driver of growth in our economies in the 21st century. So my sense remains that we have to particularly tackle the financing issue. And I think particularly for developing nations and those that are not on the highways, the traditional highways of financial markets, that is a particular challenge. And the way we can achieve this, and one that UNDP has committed itself to unequivocally 2 years ago, was to try and take these NDCs, these national climate strategies that are part of the Paris Agreement and that countries are meant to use to declare their ambition and their level of commitment to driving investments in renewable energy and adaptation mitigation, are not only viewed as something that, a tool to report to the Global Climate Convention, they increasingly become integral to national development planning. Because the minute these targets become part of national development planning, budgeting, and financing, you essentially begin to make them mainstream in the economy. And let us look at how just in 10 years, renewable energy investments from the private sector also have exploded in countries that have achieved that alignment. And so much of our focus as UNDP, and we are currently supporting 119 countries with our climate promise on their NDCs, is to make the NDCs far more central to national development thinking and planning than just being a tool for committing to an international climate agreement. And I think here the private sector very clearly reads the signs. I mean, we are now at a point where decarbonization is essentially an accepted fact virtually everywhere in the world. The question is, how quickly, with what mix of instruments, and then what kind of support can be achieved, whether it's the International Solar Alliance that India hosts and has established, whether it is the Green Climate Fund. These are catalytic investors. And then we look to really the mainstream of the economy. And I think therein lies the only way to scale up.
So my next question is going to get us to understand the complexity of your job, because you used one word and I really was taken up with your word, alignment. Sustainable development goals transcend borders, but nations have their own priorities. And in the emerging geopolitics today, which Fareed Zakaria has called the cold peace that is coming around, where of course there are areas of cooperation, and thankfully climate is one of them. But it is, earlier on, there used to be a simple dialogue between the North and the South, and who did what and how do you actually deal with it. And mostly corporations were opposed to the movement because they saw it as a problem. Now, many corporations have actually got onto the bandwagon and are moving fast. And, there is a more complex engagement between the North and the South. And there is this issue of financing, one way, and then also the price that financial markets put on different kinds of investments. In all of this, how do you see multilateralism evolving in the energy sector across nations? And I know that this goes to the heart of your job, and I have to say that I really admire the fact that you have black hair with all this kind of tension to deal across countries and across corporations and across civil society and media, with the calm that you show. But give us a little bit of a flavor of what your living day is like.
Well, in a sense, it is an experience that constantly makes you wonder, what is the propensity of human beings to look at things that divide them rather than unites them? We see that in our own families. The things we sometimes argue about in retrospect, or perhaps with hindsight, seem absurd. But at a particular moment, they become absolute. You can extrapolate from that straight into international politics. We go through phases where countries with very different systems and ideologies are perfectly able to partner. And then a moment in history comes when everything is suddenly wrong that the other one does. And it is a protracted conflict. And indeed, Fareed Zakaria has been describing this very well. And we are seeing it in a sense between a US and China polarity that has emerged. And as the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, has repeatedly reminded the world, if these two nations that are now the largest economies, the most significant actors in a global geopolitical scene, really start dividing the world into two systems, we have paralyzed our ability to deal with the great challenges of the 21st century. So let me go back for a moment to that moment in 2015, when in the General Assembly Hall, that hall where every country of the world, irrespective of their size, has their seat, has their voice. Everyone agreed to this 2030 agenda, these sustainable development goals. People have often been too dismissive of that, because I think they underestimate, first of all, the significance of, in a world of so many divisions and differences, to have one agenda that essentially says we are looking at the future with a common understanding. Because I often say the SDGs could also easily be the 17 greatest risks of failure if we are not able to act together, that threaten our well-being, whether in India, in the United States, or in Brazil, and translated them into objectives for cooperation. Now, some interpret the SDGs as a kind of template for how national development is to take place. And I would say to them, no, they're not. They are a template through which to design and think through the future of your economy, but with one very important realization. No country, however large, is an island. Whatever you will do, it has to be, again, aligned with the actions of others. Otherwise, you are in large part going to fail, whether that is on climate change, whether it is on cybercrime, for instance, the energy markets of the world, Indeed, the geopolitical disruption that emanates from poverty, extremism, radicalization. And I think herein, to put it back into my daily routine, I feel I have one of the most extraordinarily rewarding tasks, in a sense, to lead a development program of the United Nations, which is a uniquely generous promise of the world to say, look, we are going to work together on these issues, and the United Nations is going to be by your side. And UNDP has this wonderful history of over 50 years of working, alongside countries through bad moments and good moments, always trying to be, in a sense, a partner in helping to identify what next, what are the choices that need to be made, and bringing, in a sense, a normative perspective to that also that is rooted in the ideals of the United Nations. Does that mean it's a sort of soapbox that one stands on, at the end of a street and preaches? No, not at all. It's practical. We, at any moment in time, currently support 4,500 projects across the world. We help countries in designing a, development of a national hydrogen economy, just as we are dealing with solar power or panels of solar power in rural health centers in order to, facilitate a cold chain in the midst of a pandemic. And I think the strength of what makes my work, despite all of these challenges, so valuable is that at the end of the day, human history has shown time and again that ultimately we come to our senses and we cooperate, and we are more likely to do the right thing than the wrong thing. Can UNDP, can the UN be part of a country's national debate on those choices that need to be made? Can we help to facilitate, sometimes technology transfer, sometimes financing, including private finance? Yes, we can. And so in my strategic plan that UNDP has just adopted for the next 4 years, we are very much aligned with powering livelihoods. We have made a commitment that may strike you as very ambitious, but it is, I think, an expression of where the time we live in. We have committed ourselves to contribute to having 500 million people gain access to clean energy in the next 4 years, because that is the scale of our challenge, and this is the moment in time in which we live. And I think in that sense, my work is constantly going to run into, the challenges of politics and differences, but always with a very clear compass. And to me, the SDGs have been a gift to UNDP because they recognize that we are living in an interdependent world, and that development is not about silver bullets. It's about smart design with co-benefits, good investments, where the market and public policy can actually make a very different economy possible.
My last question to you will be unfair before I call Arunabha. So you can always take it out on Arunabha after that. When you look at the future, I'll give you 3 choices. Do you look at optimism that it'll get done? Or do you look at it like Desmond Tutu, who says it's better to be optimistic, so you have to be optimistic? Or do you look at it like the Gita, the text which many of us read in India, which says it is not a matter of whether I'm entitled to my fruits, but the labor towards the right cause is my duty. How do you see it? In which bucket do you fall?
I think pragmatic optimism is essential. I genuinely believe that we are capable of and will essentially make the choices that are needed, both in terms of our responsibility as the current generation, but also when you look your son or your daughter in the eyes and you essentially see the sort of world that currently awaits them. I think none of us can simply go on with business as usual. I have the privilege now of having worked 30 years in development, and particularly also in those years when I led the United Nations Environment Program. I often felt like when I spoke about renewable energy, about the transitions towards a green economy, there was a lot of benevolent smiles and pats on the back and why don't you go on? It's good to have people like you around. I, without any complacency and all the humility, can say to you that my predictions about what would happen have all actually proven to be correct. And they were always, in a sense, trying to anticipate how societies would come to pivot points. And, I still maintain the view that by 2050, we will live in a world where, for instance, access to energy will no longer be a constraint, because we will have essentially overcome a fossil fuel dependent age. We will have access to energy that is literally boundless, and the only thing we have to figure out is how you have a business model that allows you to deliver electricity to where it is needed in order to make it a viable economic infrastructure. So the prospect of 150 years of geopolitical conflicts, of countries having their governments overthrown because of interests in oil and gas, I'm sure we will find, unfortunately, other excuses to disagree with one another and to have conflicts with one another. But I'm fairly confident that it will no longer be over fossil fuels, neither gas nor oil. And, people underestimate time and again, particularly when you look at the environmental progress of the last 30 to 50 years. On virtually every environmental policy measure, always the argument was it's too expensive, it will not be affordable, it will harm our economy, it will take years to implement. And yet again, I don't have the time now to give the litany, but if you study it, virtually every major phasing out of poisonous substances, be it SOx, NOx, be it asbestos, the world didn't stop, the economy got better, people got healthier. Phasing out lead is another example in fuel. We only just managed to get the last country to phase out lead in petrol. Our children, grew up in their millions being affected by lead in petrol. And yet we could have gotten rid of it 25 years ago. So the only regret I have that tempers my optimism sometimes is that people hold on too long to false truth, that vested interests simply have too much power to prevent the right thing from being done. But thank God for our youth. If there's one reason why I'm completely optimistic is that when I look at our youth today and how they articulate what needs to happen, how it can be done, and that they will actually make sure it happens, then I think definitely I do not need pessimism. I just need to have a realism that is focused on how to tackle the here and now. Beyond that, the tomorrow, I think, is full of possibilities.
Thank you so much, Mr. Steiner. This has been really educative and I've enjoyed the discussion, even if I have asked you a few awkward questions. And thank you so much. I learned a lot. And Arunabha, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Sinha.
Thank you, Dr. Sinha. Thank you, Mr. Steiner. If I watch television, I don't think I'll get as rich a discussion in 40 minutes as the two of you have delivered. But, we can reject the idiot box for many other reasons as well. But thank you to both of you for enlightening us, for your candor in sharing your experiences, the difficult challenges that we face, but also the promise. Just to pick up on where Mr. Steiner left off, there are many conditions by which we can change the system. Often it is crisis. The pandemic is one, the climate crisis is another. But to sustain it, we need to ensure that the interests of the elite and the vulnerable converge. And again, I see a chance in bringing big capital to small entrepreneurs as one way to make that bridge. But I guess the most important factor is when we can reject TINA, there is no alternative. When we can reject that and simple actions begin to snowball into large-scale solutions, as so many of the examples we've already seen, where just producing green fodder for cattle in India is a $4 billion market, where silk reeling using solar power actually not just helps to grow incomes, but prevents the damage that women otherwise cause to their bodies by reeling it on hand. I mean, these are just these multifaceted solutions that need to get to scale, not because they're at Powering Livelihoods or within that framework, but as you articulated, Ms. Sinha, because there are so many of these pockets of excellence and innovation across the world that we still need to bring them together under one umbrella. So I simply want to thank deeply both of you for this conversation, and hand it over to Jinan Lilani, the Head of Operations, Diversity and Inclusion at Will Grow Innovations Foundation, to close off this event.
Thank you so much, Arunabha, and absolutely such an enriching conversation. To conclude today's event, I know I speak on behalf of the entire Powering Livelihoods team at CEW and at Willgrow when I say that this 1 year mark is a very, very significant and meaningful moment for us. I'd like to share a weekly practice that the team has used over the last year to help us learn from each other. So every week we have an hour-long meeting, and we begin the meeting by spending the first 10 to 15 minutes just reflecting and speaking about anything we may have learned from the previous week. So this could be something that we learned through a field visit or something as simple as a conversation with a colleague. And one of the themes that has come up consistently is how we are truly able to push the envelope when we bring in different stakeholders and when we partner with them in a way which really gives space for each of their distinct strengths to come through. So there's absolutely no doubt for us that the successes, the learnings that we've experienced over the last 1 year has been the result of the power of the collective, right? And as Mr. Steiner very aptly put it, in alignment. Powering Livelihoods today has 48 stakeholders who have contributed their strengths, their expertise, their resources, and aligned with the purpose of the program. So in conclusion, I would really like to extend our sincere gratitude to these 48 stakeholders, our entrepreneurs, our donors, our financiers, the market enablers, our funders committee, our advisory committee, our ecosystem partners, who've all played a very, very unique role in bringing the Powering Livelihoods program to where it is today. And of course, also a big thank you to all the esteemed guests who joined us today, those who logged in and participated and commemorated our first year with us. Your presence, your support, it truly means a lot to us. So thank you, and I hope you have a great rest of the evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.